Oi, como vai? Tudo bem? Welcome back to Portuguese Lessons with Professor Jason. Today's lesson is going to be lesson number 5 in my Brazilian Portuguese for Fun series, which is part of a class that I'm teaching here at the university. What I'm going to cover today is I'm going to review the subject pronouns, and then I'm going to focus on the conjugation of regular AR, ER, and IR verbs in the present tense. So we're going to learn how to use verbs, the correct forms of those verbs, with the subject pronouns that we want to talk about. So let's take a look at the pronouns first, and then we'll take a look at the verb forms that go with them. Okay, so what you see here on the first slide are the subject pronouns in Brazilian Portuguese. And I've highlighted the ones that are used most often. I have them divided up into first, second, and third person, singular and plural. So first person singular is eu, right? Equivalent of I. Second person, in other words, you in Brazil is most often você, você. Third person to say he or she, ele, ela. Notice the difference in the pronunciation of the first E. Ele, ela. Ele, ela. He, she. To say we, first person plural, nós, nós. To say you all, you guys, right? The plural you, I would say vocês, vocês, vocês. And then to say they, if it's an all-male group, eles, or if it has men and women, eles, or if it's an all-female group, I could say elas, elas. Now, they do also have more formal pronouns, such as o senhor, a senhora, or os senhores, as senhoras, but I'm not going to use those throughout this presentation. So those are the most commonly used subject pronouns in Brazilian Portuguese. So here we have some examples of how those subject pronouns are used with verbs, taking the verb falar, to speak, as an example. Eu falo português, I speak Portuguese. Nós falamos português, nós falamos português. We speak Portuguese. Você fala português, you speak Portuguese. Vocês falam português, you all or you guys speak Portuguese. Ela fala português, she speaks. If I wanted to say he speaks, it would just be ele fala português. And they speak. Eles falam português. Okay, what we have on this slide, I'm trying to show that Brazilian Portuguese has 3 primary classes of verbs, or verb types. Verbs that end in AR, verbs that end in ER, and verbs that end in IR. What you can kind of see on this chart, what I'm trying to show is that probably AR verbs are the largest group, followed by ER verbs, and then IR verbs. We have amar, to love, comprar, to buy, estudar, to study, falar, to speak, lavar, to wash, morar, to live, e trabalhar, to work, as AR verbs. Under ER verbs, aprender, to learn, beber, to drink, comer, to eat, querer, to want or desire, receber, to receive, and vender. And of course, there are dozens and dozens more verbs in each of these classes. These are just examples of common regular verbs. And then under the IR verb class, assistir, to watch something, like to watch a soccer game or a football or a TV show. Partir means to leave, to depart, and permitir, to allow. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how to conjugate, how to generate the proper forms that coincide with subject pronouns for each of these classes, AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs, starting with the AR verb. And as you can see from the slide, I'm going to use falar as a sort of template or pattern verb, example verb, that shows how regular AR verbs are conjugated, how we generate the forms. Basically what you do is you remove that AR, right? So with falar, take off that AR and add the endings you can see in boldface. O, a, amos, e, on. Okay? So as an example, we would have things like eu falo português. So that form falo coincides with the subject pronoun eu. Whenever I'm talking about myself, I have to conjugate the verb, AR verbs, in this fashion. Eu falo, eu compro, right? Nós falamos, você fala italiano, vocês falam espanhol, ele fala muito bem, eles falam muito rápido. An important thing to point out with these, for example, the vocês or eles, elas form, you'll notice that it ends in an M, A-M. That M is not really pronounced. What that indicates is that the vowel that precedes it, in this case the A, is nasalized. You have a slight nasalization with the we form, nós also, so it's nós falamos, but with the third person plural, it's really nasalized. Eles ou vocês falam, falam. You don't pronounce the M. Okay, as we move on to our ER verb, we'll use the pattern or example verb beber, to drink. You should notice right away some similarities, right? The first person, the I or eu form ends in O, and then the A endings that we saw on the previous slide are just replaced with the vowel E, or E in Portuguese, right? And so, eu bebo, right? You're taking, again, off the final two letters, ER, and adding these endings. Bebe, bebemos, e bebem. Examples. Eu bebo café. Eu bebo café. Nós bebemos cerveja. Você bebe água com gás. Você bebe água com gás. Vocês bebem. Again, that M on the end of that form, that conjugated form, indicates that I nasalize the E. Vocês bebem, bebem suco de fruta, fruit juice. Ela bebe toda noite. Eles bebem demais. They drink too much. Eles bebem demais. Now finally, let's take a look at an IR verb. We'll use the pattern or example verb partir, to leave or to depart. You'll notice that the endings are the same for IR verbs, regular verbs, as they were for ER verbs, with the exception of the nós or we form. It's imos rather than emos. Okay, so we have parto, parte, partimos, partem. Again, nasalized E. Partem. Let's look at some examples. Excuse me. Eu parto amanhã. I'm leaving tomorrow. Eu parto amanhã. Nós partimos na sexta-feira. Você parte hoje à tarde. Você parte hoje à tarde. Vocês partem no sábado. Ela parte desde o aeroporto. She's leaving from the airport. Eles partem depois de nós. One thing to point out about use of the present tense, right? Use of these present verb conjugations is you can use the present to refer to the future, if you think about it. Eu parto amanhã. I'm leaving tomorrow. Or nós partimos na sexta-feira. So the present tense is very flexible. It can talk about what's going on right now, but by adding an indicator of time such as amanhã or hoje à tarde or no sábado, which are clearly in the future, you can extend this future tense, or excuse me, the present tense conjugations to talk about the future. It's very useful. Okay, I decided to add a couple more slides to this presentation because although I announced that this would be verb conjugations in the present tense for regular verbs, I wanted to add on some irregular verbs, or verbs that have irregular forms in the present tense. Because the verbs, 10 or 12 verbs that you can see listed on this slide are verbs that are extremely common, verbs that are used every day in a multitude of situations, right? So we have ser, to be, estar, also to be, ter, to have, fazer, to do, ir, to go, poder, to be able to, dar, to give, vir, to come, ver, to see, saber, to know, and por, to put. So all of these verbs are very common in their literal senses, but they're also all used in numerous idiomatic expressions all of the time. So it's important to be familiar with the verbs, what they mean, but also what their forms are in the present tense. So you might just want to pause here and maybe jot down some of these forms. I'm going to use them on the slides that come, a couple of slides I've added in this presentation. So they're irregular verbs or verbs that have irregular forms in the present tense. So just to finish up this presentation on the subject pronouns and the conjugation or generation of forms of verbs in the present tense, I want to cover a couple of the most common uses for the present tense conjugations in Portuguese. The first use I'm going to go over is just simple declarative sentences to say that something is going on, something happens. Okay? Some examples. Eu falo espanhol. And I'm going to put the translations up in just a second. Eu falo espanhol. So I'm just stating I speak Spanish. Você não mora na Itália. Você não mora na Itália. You don't live in Italy. Ela tem 14 anos. Ela tem 14 anos. Ele é de Portugal. Ele é de Portugal. So I'm using present tense conjugations in Portuguese just to state things. Okay? Nós não jogamos futebol todo sábado. We don't play football every Saturday. Vocês viajam muito. Vocês viajam muito. You guys travel a lot. You guys travel a lot. Notice how the endings are changing to reflect, to agree with the subject we're speaking of. Eu escuto música popular. Eu escuto música popular. I listen to popular music or pop music. José está cansado. José está cansado. Just stating that he is tired. Eles me dão o dinheiro. Eles me dão o dinheiro. They give me the money. Você não sabe a verdade. Você não sabe a verdade. Verb is saber, to know. You do not know the truth. Esse bebê não come muito. So again, declarative sentences can be affirmative or negative, as in the last two cases. Você não sabe a verdade. Esse bebê não come muito. Minha irmã estuda química. So again, on this slide, we're just looking at using the present tense for declarative sentences, affirmative or negative. And now finally, and this really is the last thing we'll talk about in this presentation, if you're still with me, a final way to use verbs conjugated in the present tense, extremely common, would be to ask and answer questions. To ask and answer questions. Just for simplicity, I'm going to use the você form to ask and the eu form. So imagine it's just a conversation between me and you. Okay? Você fala espanhol? Do you speak Spanish? Você fala espanhol? Você mora na Itália? Do you live in Italy? Você mora na Itália? Você tem 22 anos? Você tem 22 anos? The verb is ter. Você não é do Brasil? Você não é do Brasil? Conjugated verbs in yellow. Vocês jogam futebol? Vocês jogam futebol? Again, you don't hear me pronounce an M at the end. Vocês jogam futebol? Vocês viajam muito? Vocês viajam muito? Você está cansado? Você está cansado ou cansada if I'm talking to you and you're a woman? What do you study? O que você estuda? O que vocês bebem? Onde você trabalha? Where do you work? Onde você trabalha? Who is she? Quem é ela? Quem é ela? Com quem você mora? Let's look really quick at how we might answer these questions conjugating verbs in the eu or I form. Somebody asks, você fala espanhol? Falo sim. Falo sim. So the way I answer in the affirmative is I conjugate the verb in the eu form. Falo and add the word sim. Falo sim. If I want to answer in the negative, não. Não falo espanhol. Still conjugating. Você mora na Itália? Moro sim ou não. Eu moro no Brasil. Você tem 22 anos? Tenho sim, if I'm 22. Não, tenho 33 anos. Você não é do Brasil? Isso, in other words, exactly, that's right. Isso, não sou brasileiro. Vocês jogam futebol? Jogamos sim, todo sábado. Yeah, we do play, every Saturday. Vocês viajam muito? Viajamos sim. The reason I'm answering in the nós form is because the question's coming at me in the vocês form. Okay, vocês. So, do you all play football? Yes, we do, every Saturday. Do you all travel a lot? Viajamos sim. É verdade, it's true, we do. Você está cansado? Estou sim. Muito cansado. Muito cansado. Estou sim. O que você estuda? You have to come up with the answer. Estudo filosofia. O que vocês bebem? Bebemos café. Onde você trabalha? Trabalho numa loja. In a store. I work in a store. Quem é ela? Ela é, the subject here is she. Ela é minha mãe. She's my mother. Minha mãe. Com quem você mora? Moro com minha namorada. Moro com minha namorada. I live with my girlfriend. Alright, that concludes my presentation on the subject pronouns and conjugations in the present tense of regular verbs in Brazilian Portuguese. I hope it's been helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, please do leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. I'll try to get back to you. If you like this video, I hope you'll check out some of my other lessons on various topics in Spanish and Portuguese. You can find those right here or over at ProfessorJason.com. Plus, you can receive more frequent updates by liking my Facebook page or following me on Twitter. I'm going to put that information up on the screen in just a moment. So, once again, thanks for watching. This has been Professor Jason, your guide to Portuguese, and I'll see you at the next lesson. Até logo. Ciao.